Aloha. Welcome to Light Drama Action. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe. And let's get to the content for today. Peace.
Before we begin, I want to offer a clear and firm warning. What you're about to hear contains graphic descriptions of violence, coercion, and abuse as detailed in open court during the federal trial of Sean Diddy Combs. These are not dramatizations, but actual testimony given under oath, stories that may be deeply unsettling or triggering to some. This content is intended for mature audiences only. Listener discretion is strongly advised. And remember, all individuals mentioned in this video, including Mr. Combs, are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. If you're joining us for the first time, full summaries for days 1 through 11 are available on the video tab of this channel. Day 12 of the Sean Diddy Combs trial. The New York courtroom was tense from the moment the jury filed in on this late May morning. Outside, a warm spring sun gilded the city's streets, but inside the federal courthouse, the air conditioning cast a brittle chill over the gilded chamber. Judge Arun Subramanian, robed in black and impassive behind the bench, glanced at his watch. Sean Diddy Combs sat at the defense table in a charcoal sweater over a white-collared shirt, gray-streaked hair slightly tousled from months behind bars. He lounged in his chair, hands folded on his lap, occasionally glancing up at the ceiling or scribbling notes as his lawyers whispered behind him. Flanking him were longtime counsel Mark Agnifilo and Christopher Clark, papers neatly stacked before them, eyes fixed ahead, while across the aisle, assistant U.S. attorneys prepared their notebooks and laptops. The 12 jurors, a mix of men and women in dark suits and conservative blouses, assembled solemnly in their box, pens poised over notepads. In the spectator gallery, court TV, and journalists from across the country leaned forward. Combs' mother Janice and 3 of his sons, Christian, Justin, and Quincy, sat quietly together in the back row, expressions inscrutable but watchful. At the center of the day's proceedings were 2 witnesses. The first was Deontay Nash, a well-known celebrity stylist and friend of Combs' ex-girlfriend Cassie Ventura. Nash had begun testifying the day before, but on day 12 he returned for final questioning. Nash was a tall, sturdy man with broad shoulders and close-cropped hair. He appeared slightly uncomfortable in the witness chair, wearing an informal puffy winter jacket and baggy jeans that contrasted with the courtroom's formality. He hunched forward periodically, shivering noticeably in the frigid air Subramanian kept at an almost painful cold. Nash had a few tattoos peeking from under his sleeves and a restless twitch around his eyes. His demeanor was flat but guarded. He often muttered complaints about the temperature or the courtroom lights and made it clear he'd rather not be there. He avoided eye contact with Combs and, when pressed by the judge, admitted under his breath that he was only testifying because of the subpoena. Still, when he addressed the court, he spoke with a plain-spoken, rough-edged candor, occasionally crossing his arms or resting his head on his fist. At times, his broad hands gestured dramatically as he recounted conversations. Other times, he seemed tense and subdued, jaw clenched as he avoided elaboration. The second witness was known only as Mia. Under a court order, her real name could not be used. Mia was a petite woman in her late 20s or early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a tight ponytail and eyes rimmed by fatigue. She wore a dark business suit, conservative and unadorned, and sat as far from the light as possible, as if trying to make herself small. On the stand, Mia looked fragile and anxious, her shoulders hunched, and she shifted in her seat nervously, hands often clasped tightly on her lap. Periodically, she wiped tears from her cheeks or pressed her palm to her mouth to stifle sobs. At times, her eyes darted around the room nervously, briefly meeting the judge's steely gaze or scanning the jury's expressions. She carried the tense, haunted look of someone who had carried a heavy secret for years. As she spoke, her voice was soft and tremulous. When asked about upsetting subjects, she would lower her eyes, her posture deflating as though the recollection physically pained her. Yet there were moments she straightened and spoke with clear intensity, especially when recounting incidents that frightened her. The contrast between her vulnerable cries and her sudden bursts of steady explanation added to the dramatic tension in the room. Outside, the weather remained bright and warm. Floral scents drifting in from the city could be faintly sensed by reporters stepping into the hallways. But inside the courtroom, an eerie quiet prevailed. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The low murmur of the air conditioner was punctuated only by the scribble of pens and occasional clearing of throats. The judge sat stock still, dark eyes fixed on Mia as she testified. Defense lawyers frequently exchanged whispered glances with Combs, who listened impassively, head tilted. On the prosecution side, one could see Deputy U.S. Attorney Madison Smizer behind her glasses, leaning in intently as she guided the witnesses through their testimony, pen dancing over her notes. Cassie Ventura's former stylist, Nash, and Combs' ex-assistant, Mia, had the floor, each in turn holding the courtroom's focus. The stylist's testimony. Deontay Nash's portion of the testimony began earlier in the morning. Physically, Nash was imposing, tall and muscular, but on the stand he gave an almost reluctant air, as though being dragged through the events of years. He frequently shifted in his seat, complaining under his breath about the freeze in the air. When the prosecutor asked him to repeat details from his previous day's testimony, Nash's voice was steady but clipped. He recalled working with Cassie Ventura on photo shoots and fashion events. Under questioning, he described overhearing Combs angrily calling Ventura a bitch and other insults during heated arguments. Nash's delivery was direct and unadorned. He said words came out of his mouth was all, but his body language underscored the point. He huffed in exasperation each time he recalled Combs' outbursts. He'd just go off, Nash testified in a blunt New York drawl, screaming at her for little things. He mentioned a specific incident when Combs flew into a rage over Cassie learning to use a football as a joke, calling her every name in the book. At times, Nash chuckled grimly at his own recollections, as if both incredulous and relieved he wasn't the target of the abuse. Nash also testified about Combs' jealousy and possessiveness. He told the jury that when Cassie and Combs broke up briefly, he had introduced Cassie to a Hollywood actor, Michael B. Jordan. Nash spoke matter-of-factly about that encounter, shrugging. I was like, he's fine and she's fine, why not? This admission drew a subtle shift in the courtroom air, and even defense attorney Clark leaned forward, eyebrows raised. Cassie had asked Nash afterward in front of Combs why Combs kept humiliating her by flaunting infidelity. Nash's testimony painted a picture of a volatile couple and a drama-filled household. He confirmed that Cassie once confided Combs had made her go to a hotel for one of the infamous freak-off sex parties against her wishes. When pressed, Nash acknowledged that Cassie appeared afraid of upsetting Combs. During cross-examination, the defense sought to undermine Nash's credibility. Attorney Agnifilo sternly asked why Nash had not told investigators about certain details, specifically about an alleged time Combs physically assaulted Cassie when he claimed it happened. Nash answered flatly he had only answered the questions he was asked. The simple excuse hung in the air. Defense counsel pointed out that despite this alleged abuse, Nash had not mentioned it in prior statements to prosecutors. Nash's response was stubborn and minimal. I don't lie. His refusal to expand only heightened the drama. Did he forget to mention things, or did he deliberately hold back information until now? The jury's faces were impassive, but a tense curiosity lingered in the silence that followed his rebuttal. At one point, Judge Subramanian even had to caution Nash to keep responses audible as he muttered his answers. Several jurors leaned in when the prosecutor displayed photos of Cassie's injuries from the so-called Princess House incident. Nash's eyes followed the pictures as he recounted that night Cassie's forehead had been gashed open after Combs allegedly shoved her against a bed frame. Nash told the court that on hearing Cassie's panicked screams, both he and another associate physically intervened, jumping on Combs' back in desperation. Nash's voice, usually measured, broke with anger as he described Cassie pleading for help. In that recollection, he wore a grim expression of regret. As that powerful description rang out, the courtroom grew heavy. Even Combs' stoic expression flickered for a moment before Nash shifted to the next question. By late morning, Nash's examination concluded. He gathered his papers and slipped off the stand. His testimony, while somewhat defensive in tone, corroborated pieces of Cassie's story and set the scene for the next witness. The courtroom buzzed softly as tech staff adjusted microphones for Mia to take the stand. Outside, a briefing by prosecutors was expected, but the reporters remained behind the velvet rope. Mia takes the stand. After a brief lunch recess, the jury returned. It was time for the day's most anticipated testimony. The air seemed charged with tension as Mia, accompanied by her court-appointed counselor, stepped up to the witness box. The court sketch artist captured her rising and nervously smoothing her skirt as she walked to the stand. Subramanian reminded everyone she would be identified only by the pseudonym to protect her identity. As Mia was sworn in, a hush fell. When she spoke, her voice was low and almost trembled. She asked that a carpet be placed under her chair, a detail that underscored her discomfort. Under direct examination by the government's lead prosecutor, her answers began tentatively, her eyes fixed on the lawyer's table, avoiding the jury's gaze at first. At the outset, Mia described her job, a personal assistant who had worked for Combs for several years, accompanying him around the world and managing his day-to-day needs. The word Diddy made her lips tighten whenever it appeared in a question. Mia painted a picture of a workplace that was toxic and chaotic. She testified that each day with Combs had been unpredictable. Extremely high highs and really low lows. She recalled working marathon stretches of 5 days without sleep, juggling menial chores like doing taxes and cracking his knuckles when he demanded. The jury listened as she described laughing today and crying tomorrow. Sweat beaded on her brow as she said that if she ever tried to leave or disobey, Combs would become intimidating, blocking doors, flying into rages at minute provocations. She fell silent for several seconds when asked about cleaning up after Combs's notorious freak-off parties. When she resumed, her voice was flat but chilling. Hotel rooms used for these drug-fueled sex shows, she said, would be left coated with candle wax, bodily fluids, even dried blood. As she spoke, one juror's hand moved to cover his mouth in shock. Gradually, as the questions steered toward the heart of the charges, Mia's emotional veil lifted. She recounted witnessing Combs's vicious outbursts on Cassie. She described waking one night to Cassie's terrified scream about being strangled. Mia told the court how she and others found Cassie with bruises around her face and neck. "He's going to kill me." She remembered Cassie sobbing one time after the attack. The paint on the witness' face seemed to verge on haggard by then. She pressed a tissue to her lips as her voice faltered, recalling Cassie's injuries. References to Cassie's ordeal were interwoven with Mia's own story, building a narrative mosaic of alleged abuse. Then came the most intense sections, the accounts of her own assaults by Combs. At first, Mia struggled. Under direct questioning, she described a recurring reality that had been unthinkable to say aloud. She began with the earliest memory. "I was sleeping in the bottom bunk," she said softly about a bedroom in Combs' Los Angeles house around 2009. She awoke to find Combs on top of her. She said, "I froze. I didn't do anything." The word penis emerged from her trembling lips only after a prompting from the prosecutor, almost whispered as though embarrassed. Mia's face went pale as she testified that Combs had forced oral sex on her. She held herself in the chair as if to stop herself from jumping away from the memory. Next, Mia recounted waking to find Combs above her on a private flight. "I felt so helpless," she said, voice shaking. She apologized, eyes cast down, for having difficulty telling the story. Indeed, certain words were barely audible. Every so often, she said no, whispering that she never initiated any physical contact. She said these assaults had no pattern except one chilling detail. They never happened when Cassie was present. As the prosecutor asked about other incidents, Mia's tears began quietly, then with sobs as she recalled them. She described one night after a party in a penthouse. Combs had given her multiple vodka shots in the kitchen before clearing the others out. Mia admitted, "I felt kind of drunk." Soon after, he kissed her and shoved his hand up her dress. She tearfully confirmed she did not want that. She said she was shocked and too afraid to resist. The next thing she remembered was waking up on a chair at dawn, fully clothed, the taste of alcohol and fear still in her mouth. Perhaps the most harrowing detail came when she was asked about an event in a closet. The courtroom fell silent as Mia whispered that Combs had forced her to perform a sex act. When asked how she felt, she managed only the words like trash. Her shoulders shook with sobs. The court reporter paused for Mia to collect herself. Mia told the jury she felt dirty and violated in those moments and for years afterward. Each time her voice cracked, a juror would lean forward a bit more. Throughout, the defense attorney sat with a neutral face, straight back, staring at Mia, but whenever Mia broke down crying, you could see the tension radiate through him in subtle ways, a tightening of jaw, the tilt of his head. Combs himself showed little reaction, pen in hand, sometimes glancing up when Mia's voice rose. The gallery stirred slightly with sympathy each time Mia cried, but none muttered a sound. Even the judge's face softened minutely on occasion. Mia also testified to non-sexual abuse. She told the court of times Combs physically hurt or humiliated her. A humiliating rant when she tried to change her tampon in his bedroom, during which Combs threw a bowl of spaghetti at her. She laughed softly through tears, recalling how she was covered in noodles, then chased out of the house and placed on unpaid leave. Another time, Combs allegedly dumped a bucket of ice on her in a hammock and stole her phone, slamming the bathroom door on her arm over and over when she followed. She described being hurled into walls and thrown into pools in fits of rage. All the while, Mia stated that she never told anyone about these incidents until now because she was terrified of Combs's power, scared of losing her job, her career, even her life. "I thought I was gonna die with this," she admitted between choking sobs, voice barely audible. By late afternoon, Mia's direct examination was approaching its emotional climax. Tears pooled as she explained why she had remained silent for so long. She told the jury that speaking out before Life Me Too, before even social media, felt impossible. Mia said she genuinely believed no one would believe a lowly assistant over a famous music mogul and feared that reporting to police or even Combs's HR department, which she barely had access to, could only bring retaliation. She repeated that if she ever tried to say no, Combs would punish her or ruin her career. At one point, she quietly sobbed, "I felt terrified and trapped," acknowledging that her guilt and shame had kept her silent. The prosecution's questions guided her through the most graphic parts, but the defense was already preparing their cross-examination, which was slated to begin tomorrow. In the final minutes of the day, some defense motions were heard. Judge Subramanian grudgingly allowed Combs' lawyers to challenge aspects of the evidence later, but largely refused their request to strike testimony as junk science. As court adjourned for the day, the jury filed out with quiet intensity. Outside, the day had darkened to a gentle evening. The weight of Mia's words lingered in the chamber air. Combs himself folded his arms as he left the courtroom, his expression neutral and unreadable under the soft glare of the overhead lights. Aftermath and public reaction. After the proceedings, the media buzzed. Reactions poured in across social media even before the day was over, often with commentary like brave or heartbreaking. Many users latched onto her phrase, "I thought I would die with this," sharing it widely as an example of the trauma victims carry. Hashtags such as #Diddy trial and #Mia testified gained traction. Some fans of Ventura pointed out the consistency between Cassie's earlier testimony and Mia's, particularly the detail of flooding hotel rooms after the freak-off parties, while Diddy supporters on forums and comment threads expressed skepticism about Mia's motives and timing. Notably, rap mogul 50 Cent, who had previously clashed publicly with Combs, posted on social media that he had once feared Combs' retribution for mocking him, drawing parallels to Mia's testimony about intimidation. Other public figures and musicians weighed in with vague responses, some expressing sympathy to Mia under trending #MeToo hashtags, others cryptically tweeting memes about power and secrets. In any case, the snippets of Mia's testimony, the spaghetti throwing, the whispered penis and like trash, dominated online discussion boards. Legal analysts on X, formerly Twitter, noted that Mia's testimony added a new dimension to the case. They pointed out that her accusations, if believed, fit the pattern laid out by Cassie Ventura's earlier testimony: secret sex parties and repeated assaults. In the court of public opinion, many were already saying her testimony was compelling, building the bigger picture. By the end of day 12, the trial had woven another thread into its tapestry. Witness Mia had presented herself as a sympathetic, traumatized victim who had only now found the courage to speak. Deontay Nash's testimony earlier in the day had portrayed him as a reluctant but blunt observer of Combs's rage, somewhat corroborating Cassie's narrative. Both witnesses had consistently referred to Combs as Puff, the nickname Mia used and Nash implied in reference.